What's up, everybody? Let's Talk Jets Radio. If you live in New Jersey, please be careful if you're out driving in the storm. Luckily, right now I'm heading towards my parents a little bit further south, so it's mostly rain, but up by me in Morristown, it was definitely starting to come down pretty heavy. So be careful if you're out. Looking forward to tomorrow, finally ending this miserable season. So this video is just going to be all about what we learned in 2023, and I'm going to start, just from the top and work my way down, starting with Woody Johnson, then get to Douglas Saleh, and then position groups. And starting with the owner, I think there are still a lot more questions than answers as far as his involvement with the team. There was that report from Jay Glazer about, Woody being the third most meddlesome owner in football. A lot of people believe he was the reason that the Jets went after Aaron Rodgers. That might not have been a Joe Douglas or Robert Saleh decision. They might have preferred the younger option in Carr. And then the connection with Zach Wilson. Initially, I didn't really think there was anything there. Then you start to wonder, there's been some reports, did Woody Johnson want to see Zach Wilson out there? Did he not give Joe Douglas the financial resources to go get another backup quarterback? So you wonder about those things, but at the end of the day, I think that the complacency that this team showed ultimately falls on Woody Johnson. Because the second Rodgers went down, even excusing what they did in the offseason, the second Rodgers went down, I think it was important for Woody Johnson to bring everybody into his office and say, listen, this is not a reason for us to just punt a season. This is not going to be an excuse for you at the end of the year when we have our meetings and you're asked to talk about what went wrong this year. I don't want to hear shit about, our quarterback got hurt. Many teams have had quarterback injuries this year. Many teams have had injuries to offensive linemen this year, and they have figured out a way to stay competitive. The Colts, the Browns, there is a long, long list of teams that have been without their quarterbacks for long periods of time this year, or on their third or fourth quarterback option. So for Robert Saleh or Joe Douglas, or both of them, to use that as an excuse for Woody Johnson, to me that shouldn't fly. But I think they knew they were coming back, and they knew they'd be able to use that excuse. And again, that all falls on Woody Johnson for setting that tone and allowing that kind of mindset into the building. So you go from Woody then to Joe Douglas, and I'm actually going to start with the positive and then get into obviously all the negatives that we've been talking about for the last few weeks. But on a positive note with Joe Douglas, the one thing I keep saying is that if the Jets had a quarterback the last 2 years, I felt that this was a playoff team. I'm going to stop short of going any further than that. I don't know if they would win playoff games, but I think the roster has enough talent that with a quarterback, they're a playoff team. I think they could be possibly even more than that if they had a really, really good head coach. The problem is, this head coach was hired by Joe Douglas. The quarterback that we have now, at least, is only here because he failed with Zach Wilson. And he also oversaw the end of the Sam Darnold experiment, where after 2 years, most fans thought Darnold was still the guy. Well, Joe Douglas did absolutely nothing around him in that third year, kept Adam Gase on board, and then ultimately that was it for Sam Darnold. So essentially, he destroyed two quarterbacks and had really no other option but to go get the best available guy in Aaron Rodgers to try to save things. Okay? But looking at the roster, just the roster, the talent that's been assembled, forgetting all the misses, I think this is still a roster that has a lot of talent, a lot of young talent, that if they had the quarterback, if they were coached properly, and maybe even an offensive line, they could win. But do you excuse all those things? Do you excuse all the misses on the offensive line? Do you excuse the misses at the quarterback position? And then obviously the hiring of Robert Saleh, if that's an issue, that was still your hire. You passed on Doug Peterson and other guys, so does that fall on Joe Douglas? All right, so I think there's obviously some good and bad. I think the bad definitely is a lot worse. The record after 4 off seasons speaks for itself. The draft this year does not look good at all. The Jets clearly needed a wide receiver or another weapon on offense. They chose to go with the position of strength, and they took McDonald, which I'll never understand. Now you wonder if they can pay Bryce Huff in the offseason, or if they're going to turn to back-to-back first-round picks with Jermaine Johnson and McDonald as their future. So, you worry about that. You worry about, obviously, the Becton pick and AVT being hurt. And really beyond the first round, I almost consider Breece Hall a first-round pick. That was very early in the second round, and they had to trade up to get him. A lot of other teams can find running backs later in the draft. The Jets had to move up in round 2 to go get one, and then obviously the picks of Sauce and Garrett Wilson. Beyond that first round, there's really not much else that we can be proud of. I think Douglas deserves plenty of credit for the Michael Carter pick, the DB Michael Carter, obviously. We can definitely talk about the running back Michael Carter and why he's not on this roster next year. You could have got rid of Dalvin Cook. You could have kept Carter. He would have had one more year left on his contract as a rookie. So certainly something to knock there. But just a lot of misses, and obviously free agency as well. The money that Douglas has spent, he has not gotten good return on his he has not gotten good value on his returns, I should say. Between Carl Lawson, Corey Davis, Uzama, Lincoln Tomlinson, Lazard, Dalvin Cook, the list is pretty long. Obviously, DJ Reed is a positive. Jordan Whitehead's been okay. You give him credit for the under-the-radar moves with Quincy Williams, Bryce Huff, JFM. So there's talent here. I just don't know, without the 3 most important things that he's failed on, I don't know how far this talent really goes. So then you look at the coaching, and I think this is where it's hard to defend Saleh, because you watch his demeanor on the sidelines. You never see him with a huddle of players trying to break things down. You never see him when things are going bad trying to coach guys up and make adjustments and make changes. I think you give him credit for the defense. You give him credit for trying to be a player's coach, somebody that players respect. But has he actually earned that respect? And the players obviously aren't going to say a lot to the media. Behind closed doors, I wonder what the mindset really is. With all the cliches, with all the quotes after games, it doesn't seem like he's got the same kind of emotion that the players do, the same kind of frustration. He tries to just give you a quote and be Mr. Positivity, while the players are like, dude, this is the exact same thing that happened last year, and you're overseeing this destruction happen again. So I wonder how Saleh is really viewed in that locker room. But I also think that things are relatively easy behind closed doors. Like, he's not a disciplinarian. He's not a hard-nosed guy, where some players might like that. You can kind of just slide under the radar and never really be held accountable for your failures. And when your team leads the league in penalties, that's ultimately a problem that falls on the head coach. When you can't figure out the offense, that falls on the head coach. As an organization, we've had 4 straight quarterbacks that have had 3 straight years being last in QBR. It's an organizational problem that we can't develop quarterbacks, and I think Saleh's been of that exact same mold. 5 straight years, the offense has been a bottom 5 offense. And those are 5 years with Joe Douglas and 3 years with Saleh now. So I want to like Saleh. I feel like he's a nice guy. He's a good dude. I'd probably enjoy having a beer with him. But as a head coach, as an X's and O guy, I have a lot of questions. And what we've seen towards the end of the year, I think, is him getting exposed. And this goes back to the argument that I had in the offseason, where I was like, this is the reason we need Aaron Rodgers or some other elite quarterback, because you're not going to be able to win with average quarterback play when you have an average head coach. One of the two has got to be elite for you to have a chance, along with an offensive line too. The quarterback gives you a chance, obviously, to cover up some issues on the offensive line, to change up how the defense game plans against you. But you got to have at least one. And I think all of Saleh's flaws get exposed when you don't have that quarterback. And even the defense towards the end of the year, blowing a 20-point lead against the Commanders, they haven't had a lot of opportunities to close out games, to play with a lead. So you wonder, all these stats that we tout about the defense, is it really just because opposing offenses don't really have to worry about scoring a lot of points? So there's a lot that I worry about with Saleh. Part of me does want to see what this team could be with a quarterback, and that's the one area, not to defend him, but just you want to see if he could actually do it with a quarterback. I tend to think probably not. I tend to think, again, this is going to be a playoff team, but then once they actually get there, once he's facing off against other good coaches and good quarterbacks, he's going to get exposed. The all gas, no break mantra that he tries to tout, he doesn't actually do on game day. And I think it's all but inevitable that at some point he's probably going to get replaced. And then you worry, like 10 years down the line, are we looking back saying, damn, we actually had the quarterback for a year or two with a solid defense. why didn't we give ourselves a real chance with a real head coach? So obviously, looking at the rest of the roster, I kind of broke it down a little bit, just talking about Douglas, but the quarterback is still, after all these years, the number one issue on this team. Offensive line, you can maybe say 1A, 1B. And beyond that, you have a lot of young players and you have a lot of young talent. I do think you can look somewhat optimistically at the roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and say, hey, we've got some pieces to work with here. We have a foundation that we can build around. And more than anything now, I think you got to let these guys experience some winning, because this season, I think, clearly took a toll on Garrett Wilson. I think it clearly took a toll on Breece Hall. Sauce Gardner as well. All these guys, especially on the defense, they felt like they had to pitch a shutout almost every game just to give the team a chance to win. So I think mentally this season was very draining on a lot of guys. And for guys that have been here even longer, like Quentin Williams and C.J. Mosley, at some point you got to give these guys a taste of winning. Otherwise, they're going to want out, and they're not going to want to waste their entire career playing for the Jets on this awful turf, in this terrible stadium environment, with this coach that doesn't inspire. So again, I think there's reasons to be optimistic and say that it's not necessary for a total teardown and a complete rebuild. I just don't know if I could trust Douglas and Saleh to correct the areas that have been problems, because they have not shown enough growth in their time here so far. And Douglas is 4+ years, 4+ off seasons, 5 years, and Saleh in his 3 seasons as coach. They just haven't shown enough growth, at least in my eyes, especially on the offensive side of the ball, whereas a lot of the problems they had when they took over, and they talked about this being an expansion roster, it's pretty much the same thing now. You still have the exact same issues at quarterback, offensive line, and possibly with your head coach too. So hope you enjoyed my little rant. I'm looking forward to the offseason still. I want to see with an all-in type of offseason where Douglas knows, like, this is it. If you don't win with Aaron Rodgers this year, if you don't make the playoffs, even if Woody Johnson doesn't give the playoff mandate, we all know there's a playoff mandate this year. If they don't make the playoffs with Aaron Rodgers, everybody's getting fired. So I'm curious to see what Douglas is going to do. Obviously, he's got to prioritize the offense, find another weapon opposite Garrett Wilson, depending on where they're picking in the top 10. Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, like all these guys could possibly be options for the Jets. You want to look at the offensive line as well. I think you got to weigh that versus what you can get in free agency. But I don't think the sky is falling. I think there are pieces there. I think there's young talent, but everything's about coaching and the quarterback play, and that's what the Jets ultimately need. So we'll see what happens, but it's been a fun year. Appreciate you guys joining us for all the streams and everything else. Can't wait to be back at training camp next year, talking off season, talking draft over the next few months, and then definitely talk to you guys later.